Hey guys, tonight we dive into the absolute misery of surviving winter in the Middle Ages. Picture this. You're wrapped in scratchy wool. It's still pitch black outside, even though you've already been awake for a while, and your breath is fogging in the air inside your own home. That's right. Your house is so cold, you can see your breath like you're standing outside in January, because medieval houses were basically fancy barns. You creak open your eyelids before dawn, and it's so cold your eyelashes are practically frozen together. You're under a stack of itchy blankets and maybe a fur or two, but you're still shivering. Why? Because there's zero insulation in your timber frame house. The walls, thin, warped planks. The roof, leaks. The wind, absolutely getting in. Honestly, you'd be warmer sleeping under a pile of goats. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your feet hit the floor and instantly regret it. The rush of cold travels up your legs like an icy dagger. No central heating, no carpet, no mercy. The planks are damp. You may as well be stepping onto a frozen pond. You stumble to the window, more habit than purpose, and look out at a world covered in snow. The glass isn't fogged because, well, there's no glass. Just a wooden shutter you can crack open a hair before the freezing wind blasts you with what feels like pure betrayal. Now, if you're lucky, and we're talking medieval noble level lucky, you might have some kind of tapestry hanging along your wall to block drafts. If you're a regular person, though, you're counting on the one fireplace in the whole building to keep everyone warm. Spoiler, it doesn't. The fire, when it gets going, is more symbolic than effective. Smoke curls through the room because chimneys are a luxury, and your clothes constantly smell like you fought a barbecue. Every surface near the hearth is blackened, and the smoke stings your eyes. You cough. A lot. And no, there's no flu going around. That's just air in here. Historians still argue whether early medieval homes were more insufferable in summer or winter. But winter's winning in sheer brutality. You reach for your clothes, which are conveniently hanging nearby. Or maybe not so conveniently, because they're stiff with frost. They didn't dry overnight. They froze. So you pull on a crusty linen shirt, a heavy wool tunic, and maybe a second one if you're feeling fancy. Then you shove your feet into boots lined with straw, hoping this is the year you don't lose a toe. Speaking of toes, you wiggle them to make sure they're still alive. You remember what happened to your cousin last year. Just a small cut from some firewood, turned black, and then, well, he's not walking anymore. It's one of those mornings where everything hurts. Your hands are cracked from cold. Your nose runs, and you wipe it on your sleeve because handkerchiefs are expensive and tissues haven't been invented yet. There's a constant low ache in your bones, which you blame on bad humors, because that's the cutting edge of medieval medical science. And breakfast? Not happening yet. No one's getting fed until someone breaks the ice in the water barrel and gets the fire going strong enough to cook something. That someone might be you. Or maybe your younger sibling. Either way, it's going to take a while. So you do what every sensible medieval person does. Complain to the nearest human while staring directly into the flames like they owe you money. Oh, and let's not forget the critters. Mice in the straw, fleas in your bed, maybe even a rat scampering through the rafters. And outside? Wolves. Real ones, especially this time of year when they're starving and brave enough to wander close to town. You saw one just last week crossing the frozen river like it owned the place. As you brace yourself for chores, you can't help but think, why did no one invent central heating earlier? You feel personally insulted by Roman bathhouses, which had underfloor heating centuries ago, then just disappeared from European life. Why? Why would you abandon that? There's this heavy, ever-present dampness that clings to everything. The walls, the air, your soul. Dry firewood is a fantasy. Every log hisses and spits when it burns because it's soaked through. You step outside to get more, your breath immediately turning into a miniature fog machine, and your hands go numb in seconds. Quirky side note, some people actually slept with their livestock during winter. Not out of affection, but for warmth. A cow puts off more body heat than you'd think, and huddling next to it might be the one thing keeping you alive on the coldest nights. And you still have to function. Whether it's chopping wood, fetching water, or trudging miles to church through thigh-deep snow, you do it all with the knowledge that one bad slip could be fatal. Because remember, there's no ER, just whatever herbs your neighbor remembers from their great-aunt's cousin. As daylight breaks, finally, you sigh and start your day in earnest, but you already miss the uncomfortable warmth of your bed. At least it didn't involve walking through knee-high slush. Yet, awaiting continue. You shuffle toward the hearth, teeth chattering despite all the layers. It's barely a fire right now, just some ash, a few coals pretending they still matter. Someone has to coax it back to life, and that someone is probably you. So you grab the bellows, aim it awkwardly, and start puffing. Puff, puff, nothing. Puff again, a tiny lick of flame. You blow harder, and suddenly a burst of sparks jumps up, nearly catching your sleeve. You yelp, fall back, and land hard on the cold stone floor. Yep, that's about right. Medieval mornings are humbling like that. Eventually, with a mix of prayers, threats, and dry kindling you scavenged from under the eaves, you get the fire going again. But here's the thing. A central hearth only warms the air directly above it. The rest of the house? Still cold enough to hang meat. You sit by the fire, holding your hands out, letting the heat kiss your fingers. They tingle, painfully back to life. It's tempting to stay like this all day. But remember, there are chores, and everything in winter takes longer, is heavier, and hurts more. Life doesn't pause for frostbite. And it's not just the cold itself that's brutal. It's the way it lingers. Medieval homes weren't built for thermal efficiency. You can practically hear the wind whispering through the walls, laughing at your attempts to seal it out with a bit of stuffed moss or old cloth. Historians still argue whether the medieval fireplace was a revolution or just a glorified smoke machine. Either way, it wasn't enough. Now, let's talk about the chimney, or the lack thereof. In many homes, especially older peasant dwellings, smoke from the hearth just curled up into the rafters and oozed out through a hole in the thatch, which sounds rustic and cozy until you live in it. Your eyes burn. You cough like a lifelong smoker. You develop a charming year-round wheeze. Some families tried to solve this by raising the fire off the ground a bit or suspending pots from blackened iron bars. And yes, that helped a little, but only if you didn't mind constantly smelling like smoked meat. The fire does one thing well, though. It keeps things from freezing solid. Your food, your water, and your face. But it's always a careful balance. Push too much wood on, and your poorly ventilated house turns into a gas chamber. Too little, and your toes start turning blue. Your neighbors come over sometimes just to sit near the fire and swap gossip. It's not just socializing, it's strategic. Shared body heat, shared flames, one big, uncomfortable cuddle party. You all pretend it's fun, even though someone's foot is always in your space and nobody's washed in weeks. Let's zoom out for a second. Imagine a noble's manor. Big, drafty, and stone cold. Sure, they might have more than one fireplace, and maybe even a servant whose whole job is feeding it. But they still huddle under 10 layers of brocade just like you, because stone holds cold like a grudge. And castles? Don't even get me started. Stone walls that sweat in winter, corridors that echo with icy footsteps, and high towers where the wind howls like it's trying to evict you personally. Kings wrapped themselves in furs and still caught chills. You? You're lucky if you have socks. Now, just for fun, let's talk about what people thought caused the cold. Sure, they knew winter came every year, but they didn't understand it like we do now. Some thought it was divine punishment. Others blamed angry spirits. A few blamed the stars. You? You blame whoever built your house without a chimney. Quirky detail time. In some places, people would keep embers burning in special boxes wrapped in cloth, carrying them from room to room like prehistoric space heaters. Did they sometimes catch their robes on fire? Yes. Did they stop doing it? No. Priorities. And if you thought sleeping near the fire might be a luxury, think again. The spot closest to the hearth was usually reserved for the sick, the elderly, or the babies. Everyone else? Spread out along benches, mats, or straw piles where the cold crept in like an uninvited guest. Waking up in the middle of the night meant lighting a candle, stoking the fire again, and hoping you didn't trip over the dog in the dark. Speaking of dogs, They were useful, not just for protection, but for warmth. And no one cared about fleas when your toes were turning black. You start noticing the smell after a while. Smoke, sweat, damp wool, and something vaguely sour. It's the winter scent of survival. You wear it like a badge of honor, because you're still breathing, and honestly, that's impressive. As morning stretches into midday, the fire becomes your anchor. Everything you do is a dance around it: cooking, sewing, mending, even sharpening tools. Drift too far and you'll freeze. Stay too close and you risk setting yourself alight. Balance is everything. At some point, someone suggests opening the shutter to let in fresh air, and they're met with universal groans. You all know what that means. Another burst of wind so cold it could peel the hope off your bones. Still, there's something oddly comforting about it all. The hiss of the fire, the crackle of dry wood, the soft mumble of your grandmother muttering about frost demons again. You don't really believe her. But then again, the walls did creak weird last night. And as the light fades and you start preparing for another freezing night, you're already thinking about how to make the fire last until dawn. It never does. But you try anyway. You toss on another log and watch the sparks fly upward, dancing into the smoky rafters. You know tomorrow will be just as cold, maybe colder. But for now, you've got a flicker of warmth, and in the medieval winter, that's about as good as it gets. Word Kading. Continue. You're already wearing everything you own, and somehow, you're still cold. It's not the kind of cold that nips at your nose and makes your cheeks rosy. No, this is a soul-dampening, bone-soaking chill that clings to you like wet laundry and settles deep inside your joints. So what do? You layer. That's your only defense. And medieval layering is less fashion and more desperation. First comes the shirt, linen, scratchy and thin. It's basically a suggestion of warmth. Then a woolen tunic. Then maybe a second tunic, slightly less itchy, but still heavy enough to make you feel like you're wearing a blanket. Add hose for your legs, a belt to keep things from dragging in the mud, and if you're truly lucky, a cloak. Wool again, of course, because that's what the sheep gave you, and that's what you've got. Footwear, think soggy leather and straw stuffing. Not waterproof, not cozy, not optional. And here's the kicker. Everything is always damp. It's winter. Nothing dries. You wash a shirt and it freezes on the line. You go outside in the snow and your hem is wet all day. You sit too close to the fire and the front half of your tunic starts to steam while the back half remains a frozen flap. Honestly, the only thing keeping your legs warm is the furious friction of walking everywhere. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly understood the value of layering, or if it was just accidental genius born from the fact that they owned like 4 pieces of clothing total. Either way, you pile it all on and pray. You wrap a woolen scarf around your neck, not for style, but to stop the wind from slicing your throat open like it's got beef with you personally. And for your head? Maybe a hood, maybe a cap, maybe both. Because heat rises, and your body would rather keep your brain warm than your fingers. Speaking of fingers, you try to shield them from the cold with mittens made of sheepskin or rough-spun wool, but these things are clumsy. You can't do anything delicate while wearing them. So, for every task, you're taking them off, then hurriedly jamming them back on before your hands forget what blood feels like. And then there's fur. Rich folks wear it proudly, sometimes lining their cloaks with ermine or fox. You've got a patchy bit of rabbit skin someone handed down from a cousin, and it smells like old cheese. Still, it helps. Fur was a literal lifesaver, and yes, they wore it on the inside, not outside. That whole fur trim fashion thing came much later. Now, here's a fun little side fact. In some regions, people use straw as insulation, not just in shoes, but as a base layer inside their tunics. It crinkled when you moved and occasionally harbored bugs, but hey, warmth is warmth. You could also stuff straw between your shirt and your belt, effectively making yourself a walking scarecrow. You tie everything down with belts, cords, and sheer force of will. Because the wind is not gentle. It doesn't politely whisper through the trees. It slaps you. Every gap in your clothing is an invitation for cold to slide in and settle. Even indoors, you don't undress. Why would you? There's no privacy, no indoor heat, and your only option is to strip down and immediately regret every life choice. At best, you loosen your belt and pray the fire stays alive. At worst, You're sleeping fully clothed in a pile of hay, next to someone snoring and someone else who smells like turnips and desperation. And yes, everyone stinks. No one's washing clothes in winter unless they absolutely have to. Water's frozen, fingers freeze, laundry is dangerous. So everyone's walking around in layered funk, clinging to the belief that smoke from the fire somehow cleanses them. It doesn't. Occasionally, someone brave or foolish attempts a winter bath. They heat a pot of water, strip quickly, and try to scrub down before hypothermia sets in. The water cools faster than your resolve, and you spend the rest of the day shivering like a sad, wet squirrel. But despite the misery, you've got your routine. You move constantly because stillness is a luxury you can't afford. Every task, fetching wood, sweeping the floor, tending animals, generates warmth. If you're sitting still, it's probably because you're sick, elderly, or dreaming of the afterlife, in which case you better hope someone else stokes the fire. Quirky detail incoming. In some areas, people wore special winter nightcaps to bed. Not the fun kind with brandy and a fire, but literal cloth caps to stop your hair from freezing to the pillow. A good nightcap also kept lice from migrating too easily between sleepers. See? Multi-purpose. And let's not forget the social status symbols hidden in these layers. If your cloak is lined with squirrel fur instead of rat, congratulations, you're fancy. If your hose match, you're practically royalty. Clothing in the medieval winter wasn't just survival, it was class, health, and hygiene, all woven into one heavy, itchy package. You trudge outside, finally dressed, and the cold still cuts through your layers like they're made of wet tissue. But at least you don't look completely ridiculous. Everyone's waddling around like overstuffed geese, arms stiff from padding, hats flopping in the wind, scarves trailing behind them like heroic capes of frostbitten survival. So, no, you're not alone, and that makes it slightly better. Misery loves company, especially when the company also smells like damp wool and old onions. You keep walking, snow crunching under your feet, scarf pulled tight. You can't feel your nose. Your breath curls into the air like a tired dragon, but you're layered and you're still standing. And in the medieval winter, that's what passes for victory. Word count, awaiting continue. Or you haven't eaten yet, and your stomach's beginning to growl. Not the polite kind of rumble either. This is the deep, echoing protest of someone who knows what's coming. Because it's winter, and food in winter? Well, let's just say it's not exactly a medieval buffet out here. You head toward the storage shed. Or if you're poor, which let's be honest, you are, it's more like a shelf in a cold corner of the house where food lives out its slow, sad decline. You peek under a rough bit of linen to see what's left. Some dried peas, a crust of bread that could double as a brick, a turnip that looks like it's seen some things. There's a jar of lard, though, a precious glop of greasy salvation. And if you're lucky, really lucky, there might be a sliver of salted pork still clinging to the bottom of the barrel. You scrape it out with a spoon like it's gold. Food preservation is your lifeline, and medieval folks worked with what they had. Salting, drying, smoking, anything to push back against decay. You had to prepare during the harvest months, storing up enough to last through the lean times. But even the best planning couldn't guarantee you'd make it all the way to spring with your belt notched at its original hole. Historians still argue whether communities deliberately rationed through winter or just desperately stretched what was left. Either way, by February, you're measuring meals with sad arithmetic. 1 onion, 3 people. 1 loaf, 5 mouths. Everyone goes to bed hungry, some just slightly less hungry than others. You break your fast with a thick slice of that old bread. It's tough, almost chewy, and smells faintly of smoke and mold. Still, you eat it slowly, eyes closed, pretending it's something grand. A pastry, a meat pie, a roasted apple with honey. The cold has a way of shrinking your world down to small pleasures. Like discovering a bit of dried plum tucked into your oat mush, or finding that your root cellar hasn't been raided by rats, or realizing the barley ale hasn't frozen solid, yet. Quirky fact break. In some parts of Europe, folks stored cabbages in pits dug into the ground and covered them with hay and dung for insulation. It sounds gross, and it kind of was, but it kept them edible. Sort of. You could argue whether they were technically food or just chewable winter hope. Now here's where it gets grim. Famine wasn't rare. A bad harvest in the fall meant a brutal winter. And famine didn't just mean hunger. It meant eating things that shouldn't be eaten: bark, shoe leather, the family cat. And when things got truly desperate, rumors would swirl about things darker still. Let's not dwell on those. You're already queasy. Communal meals were sometimes a saving grace. Everyone pooling scraps for a watery stew in a shared pot. One turnip, one onion, a few bones, maybe some herbs if someone had been thoughtful enough to dry them back in August. The broth would be thin, but warm, and that was its own kind of mercy. You remember how the kitchen smells when the pot's been simmering all day. Earthy, herbal, just this side of nourishing. The scent gives you hope. You follow it like a trail, wooden spoon in hand, hoping for your scoop. Nobles, of course, fared better. Their pantries were bigger, their salted meats higher quality, their wine flowing freely. But even in the manor, fresh fruits were a distant memory, and vegetables were mostly root-based and bland. Winter was the great equalizer in its own sneaky way. Everyone was cold. Everyone missed peaches. You slurp your stew and feel it heat your chest from the inside out. It's a fleeting comfort, but you chase every drop. You soak up the dregs with that same stale bread and suck your fingers clean. No napkins. Just etiquette born from necessity. Children get smaller in winter. You can almost watch it happen. They huddle in corners, cheeks hollowing, eyes too big for their faces. Parents give up portions for them, but hunger doesn't care about love. It gnaws at everyone equally. There's a strange rhythm to it. The early winter brings frugality. Midwinter brings fatigue. Late winter? That's when people start whispering about spring as if it's a myth. The food stores are nearly gone and the snow's still thick. It's a slow-motion panic. And the irony? It takes more energy to stay warm in winter, which means your body wants more food, but you have less. Every calorie becomes precious. Every meal a quiet ceremony of gratitude and fear. So how do you keep going? Ritual, tradition, prayer. You bless the pot. You thank the cow for its milk, the pig for its salted belly. You pass your bowl to the left because that's how it's always been done. You scrape the sides clean and don't complain. And once a week, maybe, you get something special. A feast day, a scrap of cheese, a thin pie filled with dried fruit from the cellar. It's a spark, a flicker, enough to remind you that this isn't forever. Quirky detail number 2. In some areas, people baked hunger bread out of bark flour. That's right, tree bark. They'd grind it, mix it with leftover grain, and make a bitter, tough loaf that barely passed as edible. Still better than starving, they said. You lie back after your meal, stomach full-ish. The fire is down to embers again, and the shadows are stretching long. You feel the weight of the food in your belly, the heat sinking low, the fog of drowsiness creeping in. The snow hasn't stopped falling outside. You'll have to shovel tomorrow, again. But for now, you're warm-ish, fed-ish. And that's something. That's survival. Awaiting Tinu. You wake up queasy, not from overeating. Oh no, that would be a luxury. You feel off because last night's meal, well, let's just say it might have turned the corner. That hunk of salted pork? Maybe it wasn't quite as salted as you hoped. Maybe the dried beans had been sitting in that cracked clay jar a little too long. Or maybe the cabbage pit had, gone weird. This is the gamble you play every winter. Eat what's left. Hope it doesn't kill you. With no fresh crops in sight, you rely entirely on stored goods. Root vegetables, grains, dried legumes, salted meats, maybe preserved fruits if you were wealthy or careful. But storage is never perfect. Damp seeps in. Mold grows invisibly. Insects nest in the flour. Rats leave droppings where your wheat used to be. Historians still argue whether most winter food poisoning came from poor preservation techniques or sheer desperation. Either way, you're not sure if what's in your gut is dinner or a slow-acting curse. And then there's ergot. Let's talk about that, shall we? Ergot is a nasty little fungus that grows on rye during wet harvests. It can survive winter just fine in poorly stored grain. You eat bread made from that grain, and suddenly, you're seeing things. Twitching. Numb. Hallucinating that your toes are on fire, or worse, watching them turn black and fall off for real. Some call it St. Anthony's fire. You just call it terrifying, and yet people keep eating, because the alternative is starvation. So yes, you scrape mold off cheese and cook it anyway. You find tiny bugs wriggling in your flour and just stir faster, hoping the fire will sort it out. A little extra protein, someone jokes weakly. No one laughs. You learn to ignore expiration dates because they don't exist. The rule is simple. If it doesn't smell deadly, eat it. If it does smell deadly, maybe cook it twice. And remember, most food isn't seasoned. Spices? Those are precious, traded across continents. If you're lucky, you might get a pinch of pepper once a year. So every winter stew tastes the same: bland, earthy, sour, and vaguely foot-like. Still hungry? Here's a quirky detail. Some medieval folks believed certain foods heated the body and were better for winter. Leeks, onions, garlic, all considered warming. So if you could get them, you'd eat them constantly. Your breath could knock out a goat, but your toes were marginally less frozen. Oh, and alcohol. Let's not forget the medieval love affair with ale and wine. Water was risky, often contaminated. Ale, even the weak small beer, was safer. So you drank it daily from childhood. It was hydrating-ish and mildly caloric. In winter, that meant survival. But drink too much and you'd wind up stumbling into a snowbank and freezing in your sleep. It happened. More than once. And not everything people believed would help actually helped. Some folks made tonics out of boiled bark and herbs. Others believed raw onions could ward off illness if hung from your neck like a pungent necklace. Again, no one questions it. If a cousin claims garlic smeared on your soles cures stomach aches, you try it. You try everything. And still, disease waits in every bowl. Diarrhea in winter is no joke. There's no clean water, no soft toilet paper, no comfy bathroom. You squat outside in snow and mud, behind a half-rotten fence post, and just hope your body makes it back to bed. One bout of bad food can knock a person down for days. Combine that with the cold and, well, let's just say people die with empty bowls next to their beds far too often. And yet, life goes on. You eat less, stretch portions further. You cut away moldy bits and try not to imagine what you're missing. You chew stale bread so long your jaw aches. You boil turnips until they surrender some flavor, any flavor. And then you do it all again tomorrow. People swap tips like treasure maps. Bury apples in sand, they'll last longer. Store onions hanging from the rafters to keep them dry. If you cook cabbage with vinegar, it won't kill you. Most of it's true. Some of it isn't. But no one wants to risk finding out the hard way. Eventually, you get used to hunger, to the constant dull ache of a stomach that wants more than you can give it, to the strange, fuzzy lightheadedness that comes with days of thin gruel and hope. You learn to move slowly, to conserve energy. You become an expert in foraging even when nothing's really growing. Quirky fact, in some desperate areas, people used to bake loaves from pancake moss or lichen. It was boiled first to remove the bitterness and toxins, ideally, then mixed with whatever flour they had left. It wasn't good, but it was food, sort of. You see why the arrival of spring meant more than sunshine. It meant food, real food, new shoots, fresh eggs, milk that didn't taste sour. The first bite of green anything could bring tears to your eyes. But that's weeks away, months maybe. Until then, every meal is a gamble, every bite a leap of faith. Every dinner a test of courage and intestinal fortitude. So tonight you scrape the bowl clean, kiss the spoon for luck, and hope tomorrow's breakfast doesn't bite back. Awaiting continue. You step outside and the air hits you like a wall. The wind howls over frozen fields, whipping up drifts that hide your footprints almost as soon as you make them. Your breath steams in front of your face, curling and twisting like restless ghosts. The sun is a pale coin in the sky, more a memory than a source of warmth. Medieval winters didn't just bring cold, they brought isolation. Roads turned into rivers of ice and snow, blocking villages and cutting off trade. You're lucky if a single cart can make it through it all. In many places, you're stuck, period. That isolation isn't just physical, it's social, too. People rarely gather in winter because traveling is dangerous. You avoid the risk of slipping on frozen mud or falling through thin ice. The nearest neighbor might be miles away, and a broken leg in January? That's a death sentence. Historians still argue how much medieval communities relied on trade during winter. Some say they hunkered down completely, while others suggest caravans braved the snow to keep supplies moving. Either way, the roads are harsh, and travelers are few. And the roads themselves? Often little more than mud tracks when thawed, now treacherous ice slides or impassable snowbanks. Bridges made of wood creak under the weight of frost. You learn to time your trips carefully, if at all. Quirky tidbit. In Scandinavia, some villages built snow bridges over frozen rivers. These crude pathways were just packed snow trails that allowed limited winter travel. They were slippery and dangerous, but saved hours of detours. If you fell, you'd freeze before help arrived. Your own journey to the village market or the town church is an expedition. You bundle yourself up. Remember that furry rabbit skin patch? Carry a staff to steady your footing and move slowly. Ice bites at your boots, and the wind tries to pry your cloak loose. Every step is a negotiation with nature. Animals aren't much help either. Horses get frostbite. Carts freeze solid. Dogs roam sluggishly, their paws cracked and bleeding. Even the birds disappear, retreating to milder lands or hunkering down in thick forests. You might catch a glimpse of a crow, but mostly it's silent, save for the mournful whistle of the wind. Sometimes you see smoke curling from distant chimneys, a sign that others are surviving too. But those chimneys also mean firewood, and you know how precious that is. Without wood, the cold invades your home like an unwelcome guest. And firewood isn't easy. You spend autumn chopping and stacking, hoping to last through months of freezing. But come January, the pile is shrinking, and the wood is wet beneath the bark, burning poorly. You add wet logs and spend half the night stoking the flames, trying to coax warmth from reluctant embers. Sometimes, neighbors band together to share wood. It's a delicate balance. Too much generosity, and your own family might go cold. Too little, and you risk social exile. The winter economy is as much about politics as survival, and winter labor doesn't stop. You tend animals, chop frozen vegetables from root cellars, repair roofs crushed by snow, all while wearing a frozen mask of endurance. There's no vacation from cold or work. You move because you have to, not because you want to. Quirky detail. In some areas, people strapped little iron cleats or spikes to their shoes to grip ice better. You might look like a walking porcupine, but slipping was a death sentence. Fashion took a backseat to traction. The isolation and cold feed on each other, breeding a sense of quiet desperation. You hear stories of people losing entire families to winter illnesses and exposure. You know the prayers, said more often in winter, whispered against frostbite and starvation. And yet, the very stillness of winter has a strange beauty. Snow muffles the world's harsh sounds, turning the landscape into a silent cathedral. The sun's weak light glints off icicles hanging from roofs. Breath turns to clouds, and trees become crystalline sculptures. Sometimes, on clear nights, you glimpse the aurora, the northern lights shimmering in the dark sky, a natural wonder that seems like a glimpse of hope. It's a reminder that even the worst winters end. So, you trudge on, footsteps crunching, heart beating warm under layers of wool and hope. You are part of a cycle older than any living memory, a cycle of cold, endurance, and quiet courage. Because in medieval winters, the hardest journey was simply to keep moving. Awaiting continue. As night falls and you settle in, the chill creeps inside your bones like a slow, unwelcome guest. Your breath fogs the air, curling up toward the rafters of the tiny wooden hut you call home. There's no central heating here, just a small hearth and a pile of coal or wood struggling to keep the darkness at bay. You wrap yourself tighter in your threadbare cloak and try not to think about how cold your fingers feel despite the layers. Medieval houses were drafty by design. Walls made of wattle and daub or rough stone didn't exactly trap heat. Windows were small and often just covered with oiled cloth or thin parchment instead of glass. The cold sneaked through every crack, every crevice. You might patch windows with straw or cloth, but it was never enough. The hearth is your fortress, your only real defense against the creeping cold. The fire's glow flickers across the room, casting dancing shadows on the walls. It's mesmerizing, almost hypnotic, until the logs burn down and the heat fades. Historians still argue how much warmth medieval people actually felt inside their homes. Some scholars suggest the fire was more symbolic, a comfort more than a true heat source. Others believe they engineered clever ways to conserve warmth, using thick tapestries and rushes on floors. Whatever the truth, you know the cold was always present, a constant, unwelcome companion. Quirky detail. In some regions, people would place dried animal skins or even goose feathers on beds to add insulation. You might sleep with a small heated stone wrapped in cloth beneath your blanket, called a bed warmer. It's a little luxury that could mean the difference between freezing nights and somewhat bearable ones. But beds themselves were humble affairs. often a wooden frame filled with straw or hay, not exactly a fluffy cloud. And the cold could seep up through the floorboards, making it feel like you were sleeping on frozen earth. You try to bury yourself under layers of wool blankets, hoping to trap enough body heat to last the night. Communal sleeping was common too, especially in poorer households. Families huddled together for warmth, sharing body heat as much as space. It's intimate, but also carries risks, spreading illnesses faster, not to mention the occasional argument over blankets. But you take what comfort you can get. And then there's the matter of clothing. You pile on wool and linen, leather boots and fur hats. You're bulky and awkward, but mostly warm. Still, the cold can be merciless, turning fingertips numb and toes blue. Frostbite was a real threat, especially for those who worked outdoors or had to venture out at night. Quirky fact: some medieval folks believed that wearing certain colors like red or bright orange could ward off the cold by tricking the body into feeling warmer. Whether it worked or not, you might look like a walking traffic cone, but hey, anything for a bit of warmth. Cold also affected your skin and health. Windburn, chapped lips, cracked hands, these were daily realities. You'd rub in animal fat or herbal salves to soothe raw skin. But sometimes the damage was deeper. Frostbite could lead to gangrene, and without modern medicine, amputation was the only answer. The cold slowed everything down. Movement became sluggish, limbs stiff and slow. You might start the day eager, but by mid-morning, the chill has settled deep inside, sapping your strength. It's a mental battle as much as a physical one. But there were ways to fight back. You learned to keep moving. Staying still was surrendering to the cold. You might pace the room, do simple exercises, or stamp your feet to keep blood flowing. You would huddle near the fire but never get too close, lest you burn your skin or clothes. And humor was a secret weapon. Medieval folks cracked jokes about their frostbitten noses or icy beards, laughing through the pain. Humor softened the harshness, made the cold a little less lonely. Winter nights were long and often sleepless. You lie awake, listening to the wind's mournful howl outside and the occasional creak of the house settling under the weight of snow. You wonder how much longer you can endure the cold and the dark. Yet somehow you find resilience in this harshness. You learn patience, endurance, and the quiet joy of small comforts. A warm cup of broth, a shared blanket, the glow of the hearth. Because surviving medieval winters was less about grand heroics and more about finding warmth where you could, in your home, your family, and your own stubborn will to live. Awaiting, continue. Your feet drag through thick, frozen mud as you head out to check on the animals. Winter chores never stop, no matter how bitter the cold. The livestock depend on you, and if they fail, so do you. You trudge through snowdrifts that threaten to swallow your boots whole, the weight of your cloak making every step feel like a climb. Animals are as vulnerable to medieval winters as humans, maybe more. Cows, sheep, pigs, and chickens all need shelter, food, and water. But winter transforms farms into survival zones. Feed is scarce. Hay has to be rationed carefully, or the animals will starve before spring. You toss a bale of damp hay into the barn, knowing it's hardly ideal. The hay is wet from last autumn's rain, and the cold makes it brittle. But it's what you've got. You glance at the cows huddled in the corner, their breath puffing white clouds in the cold air. You wonder how many more weeks they'll last. Historians still debate how medieval farmers coped with livestock losses during harsh winters. Some believe losses were devastating, sometimes wiping out entire herds and pushing families to the brink. Others argue that traditional knowledge and careful planning kept many animals alive through the coldest months. Quirky tidbit: in some northern villages, farmers used to cover their sheep in straw coats made by weaving dried grass into rough blankets. The idea was to give the animals extra insulation against frostbite. It looked ridiculous, and some sheep hated it, but it saved lives. Water is another problem. Wells can freeze solid, leaving you scrambling to find fresh water for animals and family alike. Sometimes you have to break the ice with a heavy stick or use buckets to carry water from rivers, assuming the ice is thick enough to support your weight. Slipping into freezing water is a death trap no one wants to face. Even feeding animals can become a race against time. Stored grain is precious, so you might supplement with gathered branches and leaves, feeding animals whatever woody plants you can find. It's not their favorite meal, But desperate times call for desperate measures. Your back aches from lifting bales and chopping frozen feed. You can't rest much because the animals need constant care. Chickens stop laying eggs in cold weather, and pigs grow restless and thin. Keeping animals alive through winter is as exhausting as any other job you have. The cold also brings dangers of disease among livestock. Contagions spread faster when animals are crowded in tight spaces seeking warmth. And sick animals often mean sickness for you, especially in cramped living quarters. Quirky and grim. There's a legend about a livestock witch in some villages, an old woman blamed for cursing animals to die during harsh winters. Villagers sometimes left offerings or charms in the barn to protect against her dark magic. Whether superstition or scapegoating, it shows how desperate people were to explain losses they couldn't control. Despite all this, animals are essential not just for food, but for warmth and work. Horses pull carts and plows, cows provide milk, sheep give wool for your blankets and clothes. Every life saved is a small victory. The pressure to keep your animals alive, fed, and healthy adds another layer of winter stress. You wake early, go to bed late, and in between, fight the cold and hunger on multiple fronts. But when you find a hen still clucking or a cow that hasn't gone lame, there's a moment of triumph, a reminder that life persists, even in the harshest conditions. So, as the snow piles higher outside and the wind howls louder, you steel yourself to face another day of cold, work, and worry. Because in medieval winters, survival is never just about yourself. It's about every living thing that depends on you. Awaiting, continue. You wake with a start, heart pounding. Not from cold this time, but from the rumors swirling through your village like a dark winter storm. A sickness has arrived. It crept in quietly, like the frost over the river, but now it's biting deep, claiming lives and leaving fear in its wake. Medieval winters were infamous for amplifying disease. The cold didn't just freeze your toes, it froze immune systems, made bodies weaker, and trapped people in close quarters where infections spread like wildfire. You might live in a cramped, smoky hut where the fire barely keeps the dampness away, and every cough or sneeze could be deadly. Historians still argue whether the harsh winters themselves directly caused more disease or if it was the resulting poor nutrition, cold stress, and close living conditions. The truth is, it was probably all of the above. Your village healer tries what she can. Herbs boiled into bitter teas, poultices of garlic and onion, whispered prayers to saints. But many of the illnesses, fevers, respiratory infections, dysentery, overwhelm her remedies. The church might bless the sick, but faith alone doesn't keep you warm or healthy. Quirky detail. Some medieval remedies sound downright strange. People swallowed powdered mummy. Yes, real mummies crushed into powder, believing it could cure everything from epilepsy to plague. You might not be eager to try that one, but desperation pushes people to odd lengths. Winter illnesses spread fastest indoors. The smoky hearths, meant to warm, filled homes with thick fumes. The heavy woolen clothes, while necessary, trapped dirt and germs. People shared beds, food, and sometimes coughing germs freely. A single case could become an outbreak. Children and the elderly were the most vulnerable. You watch the village elders huddle by the fire, fragile and coughing, hoping they'll last until spring. Children cough in their sleep, tiny faces flushed with fever. It's a painful sight. Quarantine? Forget it. You can't isolate someone in a house with 2 rooms and a dirt floor. Sick family members stay close, spreading misery and worry. The Black Death wasn't the only deadly winter visitor. Influenza, pneumonia, and even scurvy made winter a season of death. Lack of fresh fruits and vegetables led to vitamin deficiencies, weakening bodies further. You hear talk of the winter plague, a name given to waves of respiratory illness that hit hard after particularly cold seasons. It's a grim reminder that cold kills in more ways than one. Quirky aside, some believe that exposing sick people to fresh air, even in winter, helped cure them. So you might find someone bundled up and propped outside in the snow, hoping the chill would somehow purify their lungs. Whether it worked or not is debated. The fear of illness shapes every decision. You avoid close contact with coughing neighbors, limit gatherings, and wash hands as best you can with cold water and coarse soap. But hygiene is tough when water freezes overnight and baths are rare. Hospitals, as we think of them, barely exist. Instead, monks and nuns care for the sick in rudimentary infirmaries. These places offer charity, but also act as hubs for contagion. People avoid them when they can. Still, people survive. You see miraculous recoveries, strength in the face of death. Communities rally, sharing food and warmth where possible. The human spirit endures. You wonder how it feels to live in constant shadow of sickness and death, all while shivering in your thin cloak and eating stale bread. You realize that surviving winter is more than beating the cold. It's about surviving the invisible enemy inside. So you wrap your cloak tight, breathe deep, and carry on. Because the hardest winters don't just freeze the land, they test the resilience of every living soul. Awaiting, continue. Sit by the hearth, gnawing on another dry chunk of bread, your stomach grumbling louder than the wind outside. Food in winter is a game of luck and endurance, a gamble where hunger is the baseline and starvation the ever-present threat. You clutch what little you have, knowing well that every crumb counts. Medieval winters turn your diet into a barren landscape. Fresh fruits and vegetables disappear with the first frost, and what you eat is either preserved or scavenged. Salted pork, dried fish, hard cheese, and stale bread become staples. It's a cycle of sameness, and your taste buds have long since gone numb to anything else. Historians still debate how much malnutrition shaped medieval mortality rates in winter. Some argue it was a primary cause of death, while others suggest diseases were more decisive. The reality is messy. Poor diet weakens your body, making illness more lethal. You try to chew on salted meats, but they're tough, often rancid or loaded with salt to the point of making your tongue shrivel. Sometimes moldy bread is the only option, and biting into it is like risking an allergic reaction in every mouthful. Quirky fact, in some regions, people ate black bread, a heavy, dense loaf made from rye or barley that had been baked for days or reused old dough. It was so hard it could double as a weapon in a pinch. If you had a tooth left, that is. Winter diets were often deficient in vitamin C, leading to scurvy. Your gums bleed, joints ache, and fatigue becomes crushing. You might find yourself limping from joint pain, your body crying out for fresh greens that simply don't exist. And timing made it worse. The leanest months often hit right before the first harvest, when your winter stores are almost gone, but nothing new is growing. This hungry gap meant hunger was at its peak in late winter, making survival even more precarious. Quirky and grim. Some desperate folk resorted to eating bark, moss, or even rodents when supplies ran dry. There's a legend about a village where people boiled leather boots to extract nutrients. Spoiler alert, it didn't help much. Preserving food was an art. Salting, smoking, drying. These methods extended shelf life but often drained flavor and nutrients. Pickling vegetables in brine or vinegar added some variety, but again, it was more about survival than pleasure. Food scarcity led to social tensions. You hear whispers about theft, black market trading, and even accusations of witchcraft related to spoiled crops or failed hunts. Winter food politics were as fierce as the cold itself. You remember hearing about misericordia bread, special loaves baked by monasteries to feed the poor during winter. They were denser and often laced with herbs or honey to mask the stale taste. If you were lucky, you got a piece. If not, well, eating was a matter of survival, not enjoyment. Every meal is a reminder that the cold is slowly gnawing away at your strength. And yet, food also brings moments of comfort. A hot broth made from dried peas or a sip of warm ale can feel like a feast. The smell of cooking over the fire, the crackle of burning wood, these are small joys in a harsh world. So as the snow piles up outside and your stomach rumbles, you remember that winter hunger is just another battle. One you face day after day, bite after bite. Because in medieval winters, food is more than fuel, it's hope. Awaiting, continue. You step outside your door into a world transformed, a stark white landscape stretching endlessly under a pale winter sun. The days are shorter now, and darkness falls before you can finish your chores. The cold doesn't just freeze the air, it freezes time, slowing life itself to a crawl. Medieval winters were brutal because the season's grip altered everything: daylight, social life, and even the way people measured time. Clocks as we know them didn't exist yet. Instead, people tracked time by the sun, the church bells, and the rhythm of daily chores, rhythms thrown off by the long nights and short days of winter. Historians still argue how medieval people psychologically coped with these extended dark hours. Some say darkness deepened superstition and fear. Others believe it fostered community through shared storytelling and gatherings. You notice how the village slows down as dusk approaches. People finish their work quickly, retreating indoors to their smoky, drafty homes. The market stalls shut early, and the once bustling streets empty out like a town falling asleep prematurely. Quirky tidbit: in some parts of Europe, people celebrated festivals like Yule or the Feast of St. Lucy to bring back the light. These celebrations included lighting candles, singing songs, and feasting, acts that broke up the gloom and gave people something to look forward to amid the cold. The darkness also magnifies the cold. Without sunlight, temperatures plummet even further, and you feel the drop in your bones. Frost creeps over the landscape, turning every twig and blade of grass into a sparkling sculpture of ice. Your night vision sharpens as you adjust to the gloom, but every shadow feels like a lurking threat: wolves, bandits, or worse. Traveling at night is dangerous, so you avoid it unless absolutely necessary. The cold, dark hours encourage long nights by the fire, where people tell stories, sing, and pass time. Storytelling becomes a way to ward off fear, to make the dark nights less lonely. You remember tales of frost giants, winter witches, and mysterious creatures lurking beyond the snowbanks. Quirky and somewhat spooky. Some villagers believed that the winter darkness was when spirits and fairies were most active. You might find charms hung over doors or salt sprinkled in thresholds to keep unwanted visitors away. Time itself seems elastic in winter. Days stretch endlessly in their cold silence, then vanish in a blink. You lose track of when one day ends and the next begins. Without modern lighting, it's easy to become disoriented. You find yourself marking time by mundane tasks, splitting firewood, repairing clothes, mending tools, anything to keep your hands busy and your mind off the oppressive darkness. This rhythm of light and dark affects your mood too. Seasonal affective disorder may not have a name yet, but you feel its effects: lethargy, sadness, and a craving for warmth and light. The church calendar provides some structure. Religious observances, feast days, and fasts break up the monotony, but these events are also bittersweet reminders of the hardships around you. As night deepens, you light a candle and watch the flame flicker against the shadows. The tiny light feels like a miracle, a stubborn spark of hope in a season that seems designed to snuff it out. You realize winter isn't just a season of cold and hunger, it's a test of endurance against the slow, creeping darkness. And yet, in that darkness, you find a strange beauty. The hush of falling snow, the sparkle of frost, the quiet companionship of the hearth. It's a harsh world, but it's your world, and somehow you endure. Awaiting continue. You awake to a biting chill creeping under your blankets, the kind that no fire seems to fully chase away. Winter in the medieval world wasn't just cold, it was relentless, seeping into your bones, challenging your very will to live. Your clothing, patched and layered, offers some protection, but you know it's never quite enough. Medieval garments were your armor against the frost. Wool, linen, and fur were the main players, layered strategically to trap heat. But even the warmest cloak couldn't fully block winter's bite, especially if it was damp from snow or rain. Historians still debate how accessible warm clothing truly was for common folk. Some believe the poorest barely had more than a single rough tunic, while others argue clever layering and community sharing helped many survive. Quirky tidbit: in Northern Europe, people sometimes stuffed their clothes with straw or moss to add insulation, turning themselves into walking bundles of nature. Not exactly fashion-forward, but highly effective. You dress carefully each morning, layering tunics, hose, cloaks, and gloves if you're lucky. Your boots, often made of thick leather, are stuffed with straw for warmth, but they're never waterproof. Wet feet mean frostbite, and frostbite means serious trouble. Fur hats or lined hoods become prized possessions, keeping your head, the main source of heat loss, safe from the cold. Without these, you risk headaches and hypothermia. Speaking of hypothermia, you're always aware of its threat. It creeps silently, dulling your senses and judgment. Medieval people didn't have a name for it, but many likely suffered without understanding what was happening. You notice how the cold changes your body. Lips crack, skin flakes, and fingers stiffen. The chill slows your movements, making even simple tasks exhausting. but you can't stop. Survival depends on constant effort. Quirky but practical. Some medieval folks believed rubbing onions on your hands or feet could stave off frostbite. Smelling bad was a small price to pay to keep your toes. Indoor heating is a constant challenge. Large stone hearths are the primary source of warmth, but they're inefficient and drafty. Smoke often fills the room, irritating eyes and lungs, but you tolerate it because the fire is life. You huddle near the hearth with family, sharing body heat and stories. Sleeping in groups was common, a practical defense against the cold. Privacy takes a backseat to survival. Some homes had glazed windows made from thin animal horn or oiled parchment to block drafts, but most had open holes or wooden shutters, letting in the chill. You wrap extra cloths around doors and windows, trying to keep warmth inside. You think about the poor, those who have no fire at all, who sleep under thin blankets or none at all. Winter is a cruel equalizer, but it hits hardest those with the least. Quirky note: to keep warm, some people used bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals, slid between the sheets before bed. A risky but beloved practice. You've heard horror stories of fires started by careless warmers, but in winter, risk is a constant companion. Your body aches constantly, and the cold is a persistent, nagging foe. You count the days until spring, knowing each day survived is a small victory. Despite all, warmth means more than comfort. It means life, safety, and hope. So you keep layering, keep tending the fire, keep moving, fighting the freeze that threatens to claim you. Winter's chill is an enemy you can't ignore, but one you can learn to endure. Awaiting continue. The frost has settled so thickly that even the trees look like ghosts, their branches coated in shimmering ice. You step carefully across the frozen ground, the crunch of snow underfoot the only sound in the cold silence. But beyond the natural challenges, you face another brutal enemy: the constant threat of winter storms. Medieval winters brought not just cold, but fierce blizzards and howling winds that stripped villages bare. Storms could last days, burying homes under snowdrifts, blocking roads, and cutting off entire communities. You might find yourself trapped indoors, unable to reach food stores or even check on neighbors. Historians still debate the frequency and severity of medieval storms. Some chronicles describe catastrophic winters, while others paint a less severe picture. Yet the impact was undeniably harsh whenever a storm struck. Quirky tidbit: in Iceland, the snow trolls of folklore were blamed for storms and snowdrifts, giant creatures said to pile up snow to trap unwary travelers. A convenient explanation for nature's fury, and a great story to share by the fire. Storms weren't just inconvenient, they were deadly. Heavy snowfall could collapse thatched roofs or bury livestock, and freezing winds stripped heat from any exposed skin in seconds. You've heard stories of people lost during blizzards, frozen before help could arrive. The wind howls like a living thing, finding cracks in your home's walls and sneaking under doors. It whispers threats of despair and isolation. You seal windows with cloth and mud, hang thick curtains, and pile straw against walls to stop drafts. Your food stores become precious lifelines during storms. Without fresh supplies, you ration carefully, knowing the snow might last weeks. Sometimes you hunt or fish through holes cut in frozen rivers, risking frostbite with every outing. Quirky but grim. To predict storms, some medieval villagers watched animal behavior closely. Cows lying down, dogs refusing to go outside, birds flying low, all seen as signs of impending blizzards. Science may have been primitive, but observation was keen. Travel becomes a nightmare. Roads disappear beneath snow, and the few who dare venture out risk getting lost or trapped. Trade slows to a crawl, and towns become isolated, they relying entirely on stored goods and neighborly help. You hear tales of entire villages cut off, their supplies running dangerously low, forcing them to rely on frozen fish, dried roots, or worse. The cold intensifies during storms, with wind chill dropping temperatures to bone-freezing levels. You wrap yourself in every blanket you have, huddling by the fire, willing it not to die out. Storms also affect morale. The endless snow and wind can crush spirits, turning hope into despair. You find comfort in small things: a shared story, a warm drink, the steady flicker of the hearth's flame. Even after the storm passes, the damage lingers. Frozen crops, broken fences, and lost animals make recovery slow. You know that surviving the storm is just one battle in a long war against winter. You look outside at the piled drifts and icy branches, feeling the raw power of winter's fury. It's a reminder that in this world, nature is an unpredictable, merciless force, one you must respect and endure. And so, you brace yourself for the next storm, knowing that in the brutal medieval winter, survival often means weathering the storm and hoping the thaw comes soon. Awaiting, continue. You watch the smoke from your village's chimneys curl lazily into the frosty air, a fragile sign of life in a frozen world. But the winter isn't just a test of endurance. It's a force that reshapes your entire community, forging bonds and breaking others in ways no other season can. In the long, cold nights, people gather more tightly than ever. Shared hardship brings unexpected warmth as neighbors pool resources, exchange stories, and help care for the sick and elderly. Villages that might squabble in summer find a fragile peace during winter's harshest months. Historians still debate how much medieval communities depended on winter solidarity. Some argue that survival hinged on cooperation. Others point to tales of selfishness and desperation. Both are true, depending on who you ask. Quirky fact: some communities created winter hospices, or guest houses specifically for travelers caught by snowstorms. These shelters offered refuge from the cold and a chance to swap news and goods. Not exactly Airbnb, but a medieval version of warm and safe for the night. Winter also changes social rhythms. You notice fewer public events and festivals because everyone is conserving energy and resources. Markets shrink or close, and work slows to a crawl, except for urgent tasks like chopping wood or repairing damage. But the season isn't just about survival. It's about endurance of the human spirit. Around the hearth, families tell stories of warmer days, sing old songs, and plan for the spring. You hear laughter amid the cold, a stubborn refusal to be broken. Quirky and heartwarming. Some villages created wassailing traditions, singing and offering cider to trees and neighbors to ensure good harvests ahead. The cold outside makes these rituals feel like a rebellion against winter's grip. Winter hardship also reveals inequalities. Wealthier families often survive better with bigger houses, more food, and warmer clothes. Peasants and laborers bear the brunt, exposed to the worst cold and hunger. You've seen families torn apart by winter poverty. Religious faith grows stronger in these months. The church offers both comfort and community, hosting services that break up the monotony of dark days. Many rely on prayer and saints' intercession to see them through. At the same time, fear and superstition flourish. Witch hunts and scapegoating sometimes spike in winter, as people look for someone to blame for failed crops or sudden deaths. You watch rumors swirl like snowflakes, dangerous and unpredictable. You realize winter isn't just a season, it's a powerful social force, shaping how people live, connect, and survive. You look around at the faces of your neighbors, roughened by cold but warmed by companionship. It's this resilience, this human connection, that softens the harsh edges of the brutal medieval winter. And as you settle back near the fire, you carry the knowledge that even in the darkest, coldest times, people find ways to endure and to hope. Awaiting continue. The snow keeps falling softly outside your window, muffling the world in a thick white blanket. You're exhausted but can't sleep? There's too much to think about. The brutal medieval winter has tested every part of your life, from your body to your spirit, from your home to your community. And now, as the long night drifts on, you understand just how much the season shapes everything. You've faced biting cold that chills to the bone, dark days that stretch endlessly, and hunger that gnaws like a silent predator. You've dealt with storms that roar like beasts and isolation that weighs heavier than any snowdrift, and yet you're still here, breathing, feeling, enduring. Historians still argue about the exact toll winter took on medieval populations. Was it the cold or the hunger? Disease or despair? The answer is complex, a tangled web where every hardship worsened the others. Quirky tidbit: medieval people sometimes wore cold stones in their shoes, smooth river rocks heated by the fire, to keep their feet warm while working outside. It sounds bizarre, but it was surprisingly effective. The seasons cycle on, and with every winter comes the hope of spring. You learn to cherish the smallest comforts: a hot drink, a warm fire, a shared smile, because they carry you through the darkest times. You know that survival isn't just about resisting the cold, but about finding moments of warmth and light in the bleakest places. Winter strips life to its essentials, but it also reveals something fundamental about humanity: resilience, the ability to adapt, to endure, and to find hope where none seems possible. As the night deepens, you settle back under your blankets, the chills still lingering but softened by the knowledge that you have endured another day, another night. And that's something worth holding on to. Word count. Now, as you close your eyes, feel the soft whisper of snow falling gently outside, blanketing the world in quiet. Let the memory of biting winds and frozen fields drift away, replaced by the warmth of a flickering hearth and the gentle hum of night. The harshness of medieval winters may seem far removed from your cozy bed, but remember how people then, just like you, sought comfort in simple things, shared stories, a touch of kindness, the promise of a new dawn. Imagine the crackle of firewood, the glow of candlelight dancing softly on rough walls, the faint scent of herbs tucked away for medicine or spice. These small lights in the darkness remind us that even in the coldest, darkest times, there is warmth to be found, not just from fire, but from connection, hope, and endurance. So breathe deeply and let the chill melt away. Rest easy knowing that the brutal winter is only a season, and seasons change. Your own strength, like those who came before, carries you through. And when you wake, the world will begin to stir again, light returning slowly but surely. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.